Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the CFO 4.0 podcast. With me today is Karl Lloyd, who is a fractional CFO at Lloyd Consulting Limited. So, welcome, Karl. Fantastic to have you on the show.
Thanks for the invite, Hannah. Yeah, it's nice to meet you.
So, tell us a little bit about your journey to CFO, Karl.
Crikey. Qualified as a chartered accountant going way back. Was with EY for 4 or 5 years, and then went down the more commercial finance route. So I spent time with Matalan and then the co-op group in commercial finance roles. Really enjoyed the analysis and really helping people to make decisions based on facts rather than gut feel. And then I spent some time in financial control, ticking that box, and then moved to be FD of a travel business in Chester for 8 years. Really enjoyed that. So, and then you look at the journey, gone from E&Y and Matalan and Co-op down to a 80 million turnover travel business. And then my next role, we did a couple of management buyouts there, which I really enjoyed. And my next role after that, having left on the second one, was into a small kind of 10 million turnover e-commerce business, fast fashion business in Manchester. And I think that, looking back now, that's the role that really tempted me down the fractional route, because it was really working closely with the MD, the founder, and as people call it, the only grown up in the business. It felt, I mean, I was double the age of everyone else. So, but I really enjoyed setting the finance function up from scratch, putting in the processes, building out the financial model, working closely with the VC investors, to build out the month-end reporting, the cash flow reporting, et cetera, as I say, working with the rest of the business to instill those strategic priorities and make sure that everyone was aligned, and just getting involved and learning about the whole business rather than just looking at finance. I had another full-time role after that in another, well, it was a distribution business with an e-com side. But after 2 years there, I then started on my fractional journey. I've been doing it for 5 years now.
And when you look back at that first fractional role, what was the
Yeah.
biggest challenge that you actually had? So, when you went into it, was it what you were expecting?
I've, no, no. I mean, my first one was with a SaaS business, and that was, they'd had a fractional before, so they knew what to expect, which was great. Um, and there was a lot of cash flow reporting in there, a lot of forecasting, a lot of business modeling for future investment. And then my second role was more, that was literally starting from scratch. There was a bookkeeper employed, no one else, 2.5 million turnover, in another ecom business. And that was really about working with the owner to improve the quality of data flowing through the business, to help make good decisions. And that was a great role, because I was involved, throughout the business in providing them with the right data, in improving the financial knowledge throughout the business, and then really involved in the strategic long-term view as well. So yeah, those two roles were early doors and were really kind of influential on how I've progressed as a fractional CFO.
And you mentioned with that first role, it wasn't quite what you were expecting. What were some of the things that weren't as expected?
Um, I think it's when although as a fractional, we're kind of always on. It's that the clients tend not to want to bother you when you're not working with them on that particular day. I tend to work a day a week with most clients, but when you're not there, you don't really hear from them unless you're checking in, and that for me was a little bit strange. I do like to feel part of the team.
And in terms of, I guess, the differences between, you had one that knew what the world of fractional CFO was like, and then one that perhaps wasn't used to having a fractional CFO. Was there a difference in how they engaged with you, or things that you had to do differently for those
Yeah,
two?
definitely. Because the guys who worked with one before, they were, I suppose, fairly prescriptive about what they wanted. They had VC involvement, so again, they had thoughts on what they expected from CFO. Whereas the other guys were just really open to any ideas that I came up with, anything I wanted to do that I thought would add value, anywhere I wanted to get involved, they were happy to let me. So it's a much wider ranging role, a lot more freedom there, I think, looking back. And that's, yeah, I think those differences still apply depending on which kind of business you're going into. Current clients, for example, the VC backed ones, again, although they have their expectations and you've built out the pack and improved the reporting from what it was previously, and built out the forecasting capabilities of the business, improving processes. So, but then I'm allowed, not allowed, but then I do look elsewhere within the business to improve processes and reporting and data availability and such. So I think as you gain confidence, as well, you're able to add more value throughout the business.
And what do you think is the biggest challenge as a fractional CFO?
Um, I suppose it's from a business development point of view,
Mm.
always ensuring that you've got enough potential prospects in the pipeline, so that when clients do come and go, so that when they do go, that you've got something to take its place. And I think going from full time employment, where you know exactly where you're going to be for the next year, 2 years, or what have you, knowing that actually because you're on a rolling contract, you could say goodbye within a week. So it's just knowing that you've got the network to be able to pull on and land another client within a fairly short space of time. I think historically, fractional work was probably guys who'd retired, guys and girls who'd retired, weren't necessarily worried about the income coming through as much as the younger set. Whereas now I think it's not like a lifestyle business. It's more of a career choice.
And what do you think are the best things? What are the things you like most about fractional CFO life versus full-time CFO life?
Yeah, I enjoy the variety, to be honest. Um, you wake up in the morning and there's that split second where you're not actually sure where you're going today. Um, and it's great that you don't have that Sunday night dread. Um, and I think that variety really helps. So that's what I really enjoy about it. Different people, different jobs to do, different prospects. Yeah, really enjoy it.
And you mentioned obviously that sometimes that you wouldn't hear from them from week to week, like in between your day with that organization. How do you manage to make sure that you've got enough, um, I don't know, foot on the pulse of the business in between the days that you spend with them?
Um, so I suppose that's quite difficult in a way because you are only, properly checking in that 1 day a week. But as long as you are copied into certain emails and you can, check the emails daily anyway. I think that's how I mostly maintain contact with the guys, or maintain a knowledge about what's going on in the business. WhatsApp, phone calls, etc. throughout the week. That's again a great way to keep in touch. And then at the end of each, when I've been somewhere for a day, I always like to give them an update on what I've been looking at, and what we've achieved, and things that are in progress. And so the replies to that are quite useful during the remainder of the week as well.
And obviously you mentioned actually a few times that data and modeling is a key part of what you bring to your role as CFO. So tell us, I guess, about how you approach that financial modeling, and how do you think about how to build that out for a business?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to my roots at Matalan and the co-op, in terms of wanting to dig around in that data and find anomalies and find reasons for why sales or margin have moved in a particular direction, and just to try and pull out those anomalies, and make decisions, whether it be on pricing or margin, or you know going ahead with a project or pulling a project. And it really is about that data and using that to make decisions, rather than gut feel. And particularly entrepreneurs, when you're starting a business, you don't necessarily have access to all that data, so you are having to make decisions. And generally, if you got to a stage where you're looking for a fractional CFO, you've done really well with those gut feel decisions. So, but there comes a point, particularly when investors get involved, where they're not happy with gut feel. They want the data and the analysis to back up any decisions. So that would be the main driver for me. And in terms of the data, it's all about making sure of the integrity of the data. The last thing you want is to be making decisions based on data that's wrong. That's not good for anyone. So once you're happy with that data, you know where it's come from, it's robust, and it reconciles, then it really is a case of just cracking on and trying to find those anomalies, to back up any decisions that need making. Whether it's which products do we need to buy more of this week, based on the anticipated sales over the next few weeks and the stock availability currently. Or what price do we need to charge for these? We've got a new product. So loads of different things. And then of course you flow that into the financial modeling. So bearing in mind the long-term strategic aims of the business, 1, 3, 10-year plan, and then chunking that down, and then providing a three-year plan with a 1-year budget. And the financial model for me is going to be based on assumptions that are tested, and just kind of really easy to model. I've seen some models that are so detailed that have been, done the financial modeling for decades. It takes me so long to understand what the hell's going on. But for me, a model needs to be understandable by the reader. So if the MD is looking at it and he's not got a background in financial modeling, he needs to be able to play with it and change assumptions. And so keep it nice and simple. And then make sure that it looks nice. I mean, it's really basic, but it needs to look nice and presentable, because ultimately it's not just for finance people. This is the kind of thing that needs to be presented to potential investors, VCs, PEs, etc.
And you mentioned that you need to validate and check assumptions. Tell us about the process that you go deciding which assumptions are in there, and how do you figure out the right point at which to model off?
Yeah, so a lot of that goes down to looking at historical data, um, really digging into that, analysing that to come up with, what are the relationships between certain types, between certain lines on the P&L, and then obviously discussions with the founders, with the MDs, etc., and within the wider business, as to what are the key drivers, and whether that be, pay per click or social media marketing or, some kind of external driver. Really understand the key drivers behind the business, and then knowing what the KPI trends have been historically, we can start to map out what we think they should be in the future, put the basic model together, and then just sit down with the guys and understand, well, it doesn't look right. What do we need to tweak? And then that's the best bit there is the back and forth. So you're understanding the business better, but also the guys are understanding the financial model better as well, because they don't necessarily need to own the financial model, but they're owning the outcomes and the projections.
And you mentioned that the way that it looks is really important, right? What's some of the, I guess, the key things that you look for, like the do's and don'ts of model presentation?
I just keep it simple. Um, not too far, not too many years, so it's not spreading too far across, and certainly not too detailed. If you think about the audience, that's the key. Whoever's reading this won't necessarily want to know 25, 30 lines on the P&L, maybe three or four, just summarize it in 3 or 4 lines, with an historical trend, 4 or 5 years. And then obviously the cash. I mean, I try and condense it onto one slide. So really summarize P&L, a little bit of balance sheet, but depending on the business, the key one on the balance sheet is cash. And just see how that is moving over time, highlighting any pinch points, but then the overall trends as well. But just keep it simple and keep the audience in mind.
Um, as a fractional CFO, you're obviously jumping into different organizations. Have you ever had to pick up somebody else's model and gone, "Oh my god, yeah, what have they done here?"
Yeah, a few times. Sometimes it's a pleasant surprise. Um, and yeah, sometimes you're looking through and you start smiling to yourself because, yeah, that's how I would have done it. This is great. Other times you see formulas as long as your arm, and yeah, why keep it simple. You don't need to worry about that. Well, the best assumptions are the really simple ones, and if you need to get too technical, then maybe your assumptions are a little bit off. Um, but yeah, when they don't add up or they don't balance, and some models don't balance, I don't get that. But yeah, sometimes it is a case of having a look and thinking it's too complicated. I'm starting again and just create a really simple one. You've done it for as long as many of us have. It doesn't take too long to put a model together. If all the assumptions are in the existing model already, quite often it's easiest just to start again.
So you mentioned obviously keeping it simple. How do you find the balance between keeping it simple and delivering something that's actually going to give an indication of where the business is, like some kind of accuracy around forecast? What's your balance point?
Um, yeah, so it really depends on the business as to how complex it needs to be. Um, and as I say, the simpler the better. Um, I think it's about backproofing it as well. So with the benefit of hindsight, you're able to look at the assumptions you've got in the model now, and had they applied to an historical period, would those assumptions have held true? And if they didn't, then you need to tweak those assumptions going forward. Um, so that's always a valuable piece of work. I think the key is understanding the KPIs and the key drivers. If if those are complicated, then the model necessarily becomes more complicated. But quite
Mm.
often there are maybe 5 different levers that are driving sales. So as long as you're addressing each of those and the assumptions are clear, then if there is a variance to the budget, then which one of those 5 levers was responsible for it? Was it all of them? Or was it just the one? And was the assumption wrong? And therefore, do we need to tweak that going forward? So I'm definitely not one of those that sets the budget at the start of the year and that's it. I think if you can get a rolling forecast going, so much the better. So upload your actuals every month, check the actuals against the forecast, make any tweaks as necessary, and then you've got a more realistic view of what your year-end output's going to be.
Hey Google, what's the best accounting software for my business? Give it a couple of years, and I bet you she'll be able to answer you pretty accurately. But for now, it's still one of the few questions Google can't give you an answer for. But we can. Take our free quiz and find out which Sage product is the right fit for your business. Just head to itassolutions.co.uk.
And you mentioned levers. There's maybe 5 or so levers around sales. How do you look at levers, and what sorts of things do you make assumptions about, and how do you make sure there's not too many in there?
It really depends on the kind of business, but if we look at, say, an e-com business, then you'd be looking at marketing as being one of the key drivers. And you've got a decent marketing team or an external marketing team, and they'll be looking at the cost of each click, for example, and how that converts. So looking back historically at the trends and conversion trends and marketing spend and how that's converted into say transactions, and then you've got your average booking value, average transaction value, etc., and the margin on each item. So you can decide the marketing budget. Ideally, you'd be going to the marketing director at the start of the year to say, this is our sales target and this is your conversion historically. What marketing spend do you need to achieve this? So you're getting their buy-in to the budget right at the start. And obviously there's going to be some back and forth, but at least then you've got agreed conversion targets, for example, and traffic targets that everyone's aiming for. They will obviously vary by the type of business, but for example, an e-com business will have very similar drivers to another e-com business, even though products might be completely different. So I think finding someone with a background or knowledge of an e-com business, if you're looking for a fractional CFO, is really important. And that's coming from someone who's always said that sector specific knowledge isn't really necessary, particularly in finance, because I find that really useful going from, say, an e-com business into construction management, into SaaS. It's really helpful for me to have knowledge of these other sectors because you can transfer knowledge and assumptions and just thought processes between each. And that again adds a little bit of value that had someone just come from, a SaaS background wouldn't necessarily have thought of. But in terms of finding those levers, it really is a case of discussions with the team to understand what they look at. It's knowledge of the business sector yourself from your experience, and then just applying that, testing it, and making sure that what you're putting together makes sense, and discussing that with the team.
Now, you mentioned that obviously in a lot of cases you're working with investors, and you've got your obviously existing executive team. And when it comes to modeling, have you had any challenges, I guess, managing people's expectations if they're working towards a number? So, have you had to manage an MD or a sales director who wants to put in a really big number that doesn't perhaps quite fit with the assumptions and the history? And how did you go about that process?
It's always I mean, it can be challenging both ways when the sales director wants to put in a really low number or a really high number. They want to make their life easy in one regard, or demonstrate that they're really ambitious in the other regard. And I think as a finance person, you can go in there. You've got the benefit of hindsight, and you can say that we've got a really nice upward trend here. Why all of a sudden are we dropping off 20% year on year, or why when we've done 10% uplift year on year are we suddenly doubling? And there may be completely valid reasons or the ultra ambitious or the really pessimistic view. Um, it's just it's talking, basically understanding where they're coming from, why they think it's going to move one way or the other, and maybe sharing with them some history, particularly if it's a new person that's come in and doesn't necessarily know about the, the history. But just talking those through, how on earth did you get to this number? Does it make sense? And sometimes it will make sense. But then particularly it's very high. It's a case of just going through month on month saying, to hit that number, we need to be hitting these. I mean, if we're talking about e-com, visitors don't just ramp up overnight on TikTok going viral or whatever, but it's about building it up slowly over time. And you can see whether, 3-6 months down the line, you need to be generating that build up. And if it's not happening, then your big number's at risk. And that's when you're waving your flags.
And you mentioned earlier about working with investors. So tell us a little bit about how you approach that, both, I guess from a how you manage it, but also how you manage it from a fractional perspective. Does it pose any additional challenges because you're not in the business full time? So two questions wrapped up into one, I think.
Yeah. So managing investors, again, it's just about building up that relationship. They will have certain expectations of finance, and they will vary from team to team, but typically they'll want to know about. They want decent month-end reporting with a cash flow forecast, and know that they've got someone safe in the finance chair that's going to wave any flags if they need to be raised, and to keep the business on track. From a financial point of view. So it's those conversations, early doors. Laying out expectations, and quite often they'll have worked with people in the past. So it's just a case of understanding whether they want any changes. Start, stop, continue type stuff. From a factual point of view, I've not found it too difficult because they're not the conversations that you tend to have 3 or 4 times a week. These are maybe once a week or a couple of times a month conversations, which you'd be available for anyway. So no, I haven't found that to be an issue so far.
And have you got any top tips for anyone? What have you found the secret to success is with keeping investors on on board and in the conversation?
Yeah, don't bring them surprises. They hate surprises. I think if you've got wind of something that's going on, or you've got some kind of inkling that at some point in the future there's going to be a pinch point in cash, then make sure you are sharing that. It's in your monthly report or the weekly cash flow update that you might share. Just bring those out really quickly. Don't assume that they're going to read your 3, 4, 5 page report. Just give them a very brief highlight that says, in 6 weeks' time, if this doesn't go our way, then we might have an issue. Ideally, you point that out 6 months in advance so that you've got a little bit more time to do something about it, and then go to them with ideas about what you're going to do about it. So it's looking ahead, solving the problems that necessarily haven't yet happened.
And when you look at the different organizations that you've worked with and the different opportunities you've worked, was there any particular ones that stood out as very challenging? Like when you look back, was there any difficult sites, and what was it that made them particularly challenging?
Um, the challenges are either technology that just doesn't work, like a really old accounting system that no one really understands, that just takes far too much time to keep up to date, to fix if it goes wrong. And in those situations, you're just sometimes better off just keep it simple. For the size of businesses that we're talking about, there's no real need for, generally speaking, there's no real need to go anything more than a nice, simple accounting system. And that kind of extends into the data. I talked about it. The data is key, and if you can't rely on the data, then it's you really are up against it. And then the other one I mentioned was people. It's This is key in this role, is maintaining good relationships with everyone in the team, particularly the owners and the MDs. And sometimes that can be challenging because they're flying all over the place, trying to grow the business. And it really is key to carve out some time to really ensure that you're aligned, um, and keeping those communication channels open, sharing wins and losses. Um, so yeah, I'd say technology and people are ones really to concentrate on.
And you mentioned earlier actually that you'd been through an MBO as part of one of your previous roles. So tell us a little bit about what that looked like. It sounded like you'd done a few actually.
Yeah, so this was back in my travel days. I came into a family-owned business, and the owner was keen to do a transaction at some stage. There was no more details around this statement than we want to do a transaction at some stage. And it probably took maybe 4 or 5 years from starting there before anything actually happened. Um, but yeah, the journey was an interesting one. I learned a hell of a lot about about how these deals happen, and the amount of work that's actually involved in due diligence, and how you can prevent a lot of that hard work at the point of due diligence by putting in more robust processes earlier in the process. So, one of the things I do now with any new client is start to build out that monthly reporting that is pretty rigorous, gives a story about what's happening at that point in time. So rather than just having a table of numbers that you have to spend an hour to trying to figure out, just a couple of bullet points. Sales were up this month because this happened or that happened, or margin was great because of this. So that when you come back 2 years later, and the guys doing the DD are asking for all this information and historical trends, you can almost give them, there's the management accounts over the last 2 years, and it tells you what was going on at the time and the reasons for the variances and any write-offs and any upsides, and it's just all there. And that's saves so much work because 2 years down the line, who's going to remember why margin was up or why we missed sales that month?
Yeah, that historical tracking, and you kind of get through a month, don't you, and always put it behind you, but actually you need it later. And so you mentioned there was a lot of learnings. What were the other learnings that you took out of that process?
So that, yeah, it's quite a stressful um, process, particularly for the finance person in a smaller business, where not only will you be looking after the financial due diligence, but quite often you'll be tasked with the legal DD, and trying to dig out contracts for all your main suppliers and all your main customers, um, which some might not have contracts. So you really are scrambling around in some circumstances to try and find all this information. And again, it's about preparation now and making sure that, the deal might not be even in the ether at the moment, let alone on the horizon. So, nevertheless, if you sign any of your documents, just make sure that they're all filed nicely, so that when you come to need them, they're just all there. In You might even call it a data room. I do, just in case. But it's just about being prepared. And I know nothing can really prepare you, I don't think, until you've done your first one. And then, once bitten, twice shy, uh, you're a lot more prepared. And the second time round, even if there's nothing on the horizon, you're still thinking about it in the background. And that's the way I approach now is, if you are thinking about doing something in the future, then we'll start now. We'll put those We'll put that structure in place. We'll gather our data. We'll keep it maintained. We'll start telling the story on a monthly basis, just so that if and when someone comes knocking, we've got that story all prepared. We've got the data for them. We've got a list of all our customers. Oh, and there's a contract, and there's our contracts for the suppliers. We got it all nailed down.
And was there anything like that surprised you about the process as you went into it? Anything happened that you weren't expecting?
Brexit happened. That was then.
In the
And,
middle of your go?
well, not necessarily in the middle. No, it's nearly the end. We were just about to sign the deal, and the vote was the following week. So they understandably said, listen, we know nothing stupid is going to happen, but it would be remiss of us to sign it today and not just wait and see. So let's pencil in next Thursday to sign this, with the vote being on the Tuesday or whenever it was. Anyway, the inevitable happened. So all went quiet for a few months, and they obviously took the opportunity to chip at the price. Um, but yeah, we did get the deal away 3 months later.
Mhm.
So that was a surprise.
Yeah, I can imagine that being a real challenge midway through. Or
Yeah,
not even midway through, right at the end of that buying cycle as well, after you've done all that work.
we had to do it all again because things had changed. So that
Wow.
was a whole load of fun.
I bet it was. I'm not sure fun is the word that I would use, but absolutely. So we talked a lot about obviously the day to day of a fractional CFO, and when you're speaking to others that are considering the world of becoming a fractional CFO, like what's the advice that you would give them to figure out whether it's the right choice for them as an individual?
I think you have to be comfortable selling yourself. I mean, sometimes if you're in a role, you've not necessarily had interviews for years and years, and sometimes I feel like I'm always being interviewed,
Mm,
because whether it's a client or a potential client or an investor or whoever, they can all be potential clients ultimately.
mm,
So it's that ability to sell yourself. Um, it's the ability to sleep at night knowing that um, you might not have enough clients at the moment, but that you're
mm,
doing the best that you can to generate more prospects. Sometimes that can be tricky in a dry patch, but I
yeah.
think the key is from that point of view, the key is to have a buffer. Before you go into this, have a little buffer so that you're not too worried all the time. But I think the variety, you've got to be happy with that variety. You're not going to be in the same office every day. I prefer to go into the office, so I do go into all my clients. Others work from home, and they might really enjoy that. So yeah, it's just about carving out a niche for yourself, and, making it your own.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Carl, for sharing both your journey and some top tips for any aspiring fractional CFOs. If people want to learn more about you or about Lloyd, your organization, where's the best place to find you?
The best place is LinkedIn. You find me Karl Lloyd CFO, or Lloyd Consulting, but Karl Lloyd is where all the information is. Um, yeah, if you've got any questions, then yeah, just reach out, Karl at Lloyd Consulting Limited.com.
Absolutely. And for anyone that's listening and would like to do that, access that profile, we will pop the link in as normal. So thank you so much, Karl, for joining us on today's podcast. And thank you to our listeners. If you have any questions as listeners that I should have asked Karl, then please do reach out to me. Always great to get some ideas and thoughts for our fractional CFO series. Thanks again for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.
So for those of you that don't know what we do here at ITAS, so we are a financial transformation consultancy that specialises in Sage technologies, whether that is looking at a new solution, evaluating your current solution, or just helping you to get the most out of your current setup, we can help. But rather than me tell you all the reasons that you should consider working with us as a Sage partner or a transformation consultancy partner, I'm going to let our customers do the talking for us.
ITAS were there from the sort of get-go, helping us, talking through what the process was going to involve, setting expectations, making it clear that how much work we were going to have to put in to make sure that the project was a success at the end. And then talking us through all our different options, looking through our current processes, making us reevaluate what was important, which elements we wanted to move across to the new system, how we wanted to configure our new system, and also kind of making us sit back and really think about what is the success of this project. When we get to the other end, when we finish the implementation and we're in the system, what's success going to look like? And actually, putting that question back to us and really making us sit down and think about what is it that we are looking to gain from this whole process was really useful internally, making us really think about the key objectives and which areas to maybe prioritize over others. It was also really helpful sitting down and thinking about it rather than one big, huge project, actually splitting it down into different phases, sort of smaller bite-sized chunks, which made it seem a little bit more achievable within the time. And then thankfully, ITAS have been super flexible with us during this process because it happened to coincide our implementation with our first ever financial audit, which just took up huge amounts of our time that we didn't expect. So we did have to slightly push back some of our go live dates, and thankfully ITAS were accommodating and actually helped us navigate through that process. And I'd like to say that thankfully we're out the other side of our first phase of go live, and loving the move to Intact.